we'll just go with this. Okay, so let's see. So let's get started. Oh, here we go. Okay, we're good. And okay, great. Works. Okay, so today I want to talk about three different things. First, a little bit about prior knowledge, which is basic cognitive science principle in terms of how people learn. Second thing I want to talk about is just a little bit about stories and storytelling. And while the 3-minute thesis, you might think, oh, that's a time for me to tell a story, I think you can use some of the basic principles, as well as it'll be helpful for you when you do other kinds of presentations, okay? And then final is practice, practicing to prevent or avoid performance anxiety. Because I think a lot of times we practice and then we actually get to it and then all of our practice kind of goes out the window. So I want to talk a little bit about how to practice, okay? All right, so first thing I want to talk about again is prior knowledge and how it can help or hinder people's learning. So prior knowledge helps learning. We kind of know that from the use of things like analogies and metaphors. Okay, so a basic analogy you may have heard of is the lock and key, right? Enzymes, people are familiar with that? Yeah, okay. It's kind of straightforward, right? The way it works, again, is that we have this prior knowledge information about how things work, and we're just using a metaphor so that we have the new knowledge and it overlays on the old knowledge, okay? Other forms of how it can help learning are just common examples. So for example, what do these three things have in common? So it's wool, PVC, and neoprene. Anyone? Anyone? No chemical engineers here? Okay. Well, they're all polymers. They're all polymers, okay? So using kind of common uses in terms of things we use every day can be helpful in terms of helping your understanding, okay? So, however, prior knowledge can help learning, but also hinder it. All right, and so let me give you an example of this, okay? When this becomes this, where does all that stuff come from? Okay, so quick poll. A, mostly from water, B, mostly from the soil, nutrients from the soil, C, mostly from the air, or D, a roughly equal proportion of water, soil, and air. Okay? A, how many people think A? B, how many people think B? C, how many people think C? Okay, a few. And D. Okay, so most people think D, okay? So, anybody here go to Harvard or MIT as an undergrad? Oh, sweet, okay. We can make fun of them. All right, so this was done a while ago at Harvard and MIT, and they basically asked recent grads of Harvard and MIT the exact same question, and here is their answer. Oh. And it's not working. Oh, you know why it's not working? Because we have the wrong codec. Okay, so, all right. So basically, this is a, what they did is they interviewed them, and they also said an equal combination of water, nutrients from the soil, and the air. And the correct answer is, in the back, C. Why did you choose C? It's carbon dioxide in the air, right? Okay, we think, they think kind of sheepish now, right? It's a misconception that plants are like humans, or that air has no weight, okay? So, we all know the photosynthesis equation, right? That's CO2, H2O, sunlight equals basically the carbohydrate plus oxygen, okay? So, we have, however, this misconception that kind of blocks our ability to understand this, okay? Because I guarantee you, all of those folks have learned about photosynthesis in high school, right? And maybe even in college. But it never really sunk in because they have this misconception that air has no weight and that plants are like humans, okay? So we have these misconceptions, right? And so what I'd like you to think about is, what kind of misconceptions do you have in your own field or your own research. Okay? So take a minute or so, jot down some ideas, and then pair up. Okay? Let's get to work. Okay, so you, what is a common misconception in your field?
All right, so I'm from mathematics.
Okay, math.
So one of the misconceptions I think that happens a lot is that math is about solving equations, getting answers.
It's about, getting answers, getting the right answer, right? Because that's often what hangs people up. It's like, I gotta get the right answer. Good, excellent. You in the back. Scarf.
I'm not a student. I'm part of CLA Office of Research, so I'm just here kind of seeing what you're doing.
What I'm doing. Okay.
So someone else probably would
Okay.
have something better than I.
All right. Say, glasses.
I don't really have anything to talk
Okay. All right. Yes.
that there is one thing that causes cancer. There's
Specific cure. Magical. Okay, great. So you're probably thinking, like, why am I asking you for these misconceptions? Okay, so part of it is because I'm interested in terms of storytelling, which we will get to. So again, oh man, you gotta be kidding me. Okay, again, so prior knowledge can help learning, it can hinder it, all right? But I do want to talk about storytelling because I think this notion of misconceptions can be particularly useful for you. And the framework, and it could be useful, is in terms of two aspects, okay? And the first aspect is where I can think it would be useful, is hooking, creating a hook, okay? Which is something unexpected, something unusual to pique their curiosity. And misconceptions, if you bring them and foreground them, can be an interesting way to hook your readers or to hook your participants and the audience. Okay, and the other words is piece of advice that I have about storytelling is keeping it simple. Okay, so I just want to talk about those two things and elaborate a little bit more on that. Right. So, first thing is thinking about a hook. Again, it's a way that you can engage people immediately. Okay, so it can be a question, it can be an image, whatever. Okay. Because you want to get their attention immediately. Because they will never be as curious as what you have to say as those first opening 10, 20 seconds. So if you're going to say something along the lines of, "Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Today I'm going to talk about enzymes." And you just kind of keep going, you've lost them. You've lost them. Okay? But if you start with a question, something, or you just that image of the wool, the neoprene, the PVC. What do all these things have in common? Right? So you've got them hooked, and once you got them hooked, you can move them. Okay? And so thinking about your misconceptions, you might want to consider using that misconception in your presentation. Okay? To get their attention immediately. Okay? So in addition to the hook, you want to use that hook to in some ways frame your presentation, okay? So using a kind of a narrative framework or premise, okay? So there are a couple of different ones. There's the journey or mystery, the quest. So this is basic kind of like Joseph Campbell Hero 101. In the quest, the task must be hard, easy to understand, and a great deal must hang on its outcome, okay? Typical story. Arc, okay? So let's just think of something like, I don't know, Star Wars, okay? So, folks have seen Star Wars here? You know, folks, okay, so what is the hard task? Blow up the Death Star, okay? Is it easy to understand? Yeah, blow up the Death Star. And does a great deal hang on this? Yeah, okay, yes, it's the destruction of worlds, okay? So thinking about how do you frame your research around that? It could be like, I want to find a cure for cancer, okay? Does a great deal hang on this? Yeah. Is it easy to, yeah, okay? So that's one way of thinking about things. also embedded within this is the fact that the stakes are high. If you have no stakes, what's the point of the story? Okay? So thinking about my research can change the world, something along those lines, okay? And you might think, well, I just do basic research. But your basic research has applications, has always had applications further down the line. All right, so other kinds of things. The mystery or the detective story. So you start with a mystery, you have the actual result, and how do you get there? Okay, so that's another framework. Another one that's pretty easy to understand, past, present, future. So this is what's been done in the past. This is what my research is. And this is the kind of possibility that these are the kind of applications it has to offer. Another familiar one, problem, solution, result. And finally, what, so what, now what? Okay. So just thinking of some general structures on which to hang your research, to frame it so that it makes sense for folks. Okay. All right, questions about that? Okay, let's move on. All right, so again, thinking about this kind of notion about how prior knowledge can help your learning. A lot of us are familiar with the kind of past, present, future, or with the kind of what, so what, now what. So using that to your advantage, okay? Or perhaps using those misconceptions to surprise and engage, okay? Because you're taking their assumptions and then you're pulling them away. All right, so moving right along. Okay, we talked a little bit about, again, the notion of this familiar circumstances, or perhaps violating those with those misconceptions. Second thing I want to talk about is beginning in the moment, okay? So, oftentimes, especially if you have the kind of past, present, future, or chronological kind of explanation, it really tends to be quite stale. Because it's this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, okay? So let me take a kind of typical sort of way of telling a story. So I always knew that I wanted to be a doctor because when I was young, I was really interested in just how things work. And so when I was on a road trip with my family, I used to ask my parents to stop the car so I could get out and examine the roadkill. When I was in high school, I really enjoyed dissecting frogs. And then after high school, I decided to become a pre-med major in college. But I had some difficulty with organic chemistry, and it just kind of unspools, right? And then I'll say, okay, and then so my first job was as an emergency room physician, and my first patient, she was a car crash victim, and she was just completely, badly bruised and couldn't recognize her face. She had compound fractures and both of her legs, her bones were sticking out, and it was just a mess. And she probably would have died, and if it had not been for me. Okay, again, chronological unfolding, right? Kind of boring because there's not really much kind of drive or momentum to it. Just one thing happens and another thing happens and another thing happens. And you might feel that way in your research, right? Just one thing happens, nothing happens, and another thing happens, okay? But you need to frame it in terms of a story. And so one way of engaging people right off the bat with a hook is something along the lines of this. So, 23-year-old female. Couldn't even recognize her because her face was so badly bruised. Compound fractures, both of her legs, probably would have bled out in about 10 minutes. Died if it hadn't been for me. That was my first patient. So immediately you see the stakes that are involved. You're hooked because you're thinking, okay, what is going on here? Right, I'm starting in the moment. And it grabs you, okay? So thinking about starting in the moment, so you're bringing your reader in, okay? Final thing is concluding by returning to the hook, okay? And this is a way of telling your story with that ending in mind. Too often when people tell stories, they just kind of stop talking. And then they kind of look expectantly, and then other people look expectantly, and then you kind of, storyteller kind of says, oh, well, that's it. Okay, it just sort of peters out. When you tell a story, you want to have your end in mind, and you want to try and loop it back to your hook. because that signals to the listener that you're wrapping up. So if I were to tell the same story about, being an emergency room physician, I would probably wrap up by saying, now if I remember back to my first patient, she was what really made going into this field so important. And that's when I knew I wanted, and so my whole lifelong dream of being a physician was captured in this patient. Okay, so trying to loop back and tying back to your beginning. Okay, so I had an example of that here from one of last year's finalists, and she talked about her 5-year-old picture. Did anybody see this by any chance? Okay, so she started kind of in the moment. She had a picture of herself, 5 years old, with a backpack on. Okay, and then do you remember how she ended? Right back there. Okay, so you knew she was wrapping up as she referred back to that. And her basic premise was wetlands, right? Looking and thinking of wetlands at 5 years old is oftentimes, or her picture of herself as 5 years old is often how we view wetlands, right? We take the snapshot and that's how we treat wetlands for the rest of whatever, okay? But wetlands grow, mature, and change like she did, right? And so she goes back to this thinking we need to have a new way of looking at wetlands. Okay? So again, thinking about circling back to that opening hook. All right. So, what would your hook be? What would your hook be? So, again, take a few minutes, partner up and share. And use this as an opportunity to rehearse. Okay? Because you'll never get this opportunity again. If you think in your mind, oh yeah, this will hook them, and it doesn't with your partner. So, partner up. Great. All right. So, next thing I want to talk about is keeping it simple. Keeping it simple. All right. So, a couple of aspects to keeping it simple. Using vivid, concrete details. Okay? So, the example I gave, compound fractures, bleeding out, that sort of thing. Trying to think of these really specific, vivid details so they can see, so they're actually there, right? And again, using these kinds of details can often have that kind of emotional weight to it, okay? But the flip side of that is making sure you remove extraneous information, because whatever doesn't add subtracts. Okay, so I'll begin this by telling a joke, okay? So, here's a grasshopper, and it hadn't had anything to drink in about 28 days, which if you think is the more than half of the lifespan of a mature grasshopper, since a mature grasshopper lives on average of about 53 days, okay? So it hadn't had a drink in a very, very long time. But fortunately, came upon a bar. Walked down the stairs in the bar. It was a basement bar. And as it entered, it noticed it was very, very dark. Part of it being due to the fact that it was a bar in the basement. And part of the fact was that it had very poor lighting. And part of that was due to the fact that a number of the bulbs had burnt out. And so the grasshopper thought, well, they should probably replace these bulbs with compact fluorescent or LED bulbs, because those are far more energy efficient and would last a lot longer than these incandescent bulbs. But on the other hand, CF bulbs tend to have this kind of artificial, unnatural hue to it. And LED bulbs actually have a wide range of different kinds of hues to it. So, well, Grasshopper made a mental note to itself to bring it to the attention of the proprietor about the pros and cons of LED and CF bulbs. Remember, it was thirsty, continued to walk on, noticed a smell, curious smell. Smell that mixed vomit, urine, and stale. But the grasshopper again was thirsty, so it continued on to the bar and noticed a patron at the bar, some of which were really well dressed and some of which were poorly dressed. And in fact, there was a patron who had an immaculate pedicure and manicure, but she had no shoes on, even though she wore an evening gown. So the grasshopper, again, being a connoisseur of pedicures and manicures, made a mental note of itself to contact this patron and find out where she at first. But again, realizing he was thirsty, continued on. Noticed that there were a range of stools on which to sit, some of which were four-legged, some of which were three-legged. Chose to sit on a three-legged stool because three-legged structures are inherently more stable. And that, again, proved to be the right choice because the stool did not rock, despite the fact that the floor was badly buckled underneath. Grasshopper looked at the bartender. Bartender turned to the grasshopper. Said, "You know, we have a drink named after you." Grasshopper paused, looked off in the distance, put an appendage on what could be considered his chin, returned the gaze to the bartender and said, "Really? You have a drink named Percy." I totally killed that joke! I totally killed it! I did, didn't you guys? Okay, but I killed it in a good way and a bad way. Because I just kept adding details to it, right? So I just kept saying, like, CF bulbs and LED bulbs and three-legged structures are inherently more stable than four-legged structures. And this, grasshoppers don't even have fingernails and toenails, right? They have exoskeletons. But by giving you these details, you thought I was leading somewhere, right? Otherwise, why would I conclude these details? Okay? So whenever you're telling a story, you have to be absolutely ruthless in cutting away details. And part of the thing with the 3MT thesis is that you can't get lost in the weeds with the kind of technical details, right? It reminds me of like dissertation defenses when somebody puts up a slide and it represents like 3 years of their work, and it's just this incomprehensible graph, and you're kind of looking at it, and they feel like, I have to put this in because I worked so hard. This is evidence of how hard I worked for the last 3 years. And these are all the tests and these numbers, and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, nobody cares because you're just looking and you're like, what? Okay? That's got to go. It cannot be there. You have to be absolutely ruthless in distilling what is at the essence and core of your research. Okay? So, again, whatever doesn't add subtracts. And the final thing is alternating between what are considered the in moments and out moments, okay, and showing and telling, all right? So every story has in moments where you're just describing what is happening. So, grasshopper walking in, noticed a curious mixture of smells, urine, vomit, stale beer, okay? That's an in moment. It's describing what is happening in. But you also need those out moments, those moments that tell the listener, why is this important? Why is this important? Okay? So, the problems with the whole thing with the grasshopper is I kept giving you these in moments, and then you kind of assumed, like, there's got to be some out moments. You're like, why is this important? Why is he? But it didn't happen. Okay? So, when you provide details about your research, we need to have those kind of out moments about telling the listener, why is this important? Why is this significant? Questions about that so far? Questions of what I said so far? Okay, well, let's talk about practice and performance anxiety. So, some folks have talked about performance anxiety and almost talk about it as a kind of natural response. It's sort of baked and hardwired into ourselves, okay? So public speaking. Why do we fear public speaking? Well, it's because most of the time we're sort of out and about, surrounded by people, surrounded by nature, but when we are publicly speaking, we're alone by ourselves, facing a crowd of people who are staring at us, right? We're exposed, and we have no weapons, okay? So, it leads a lot of times to this kind of fight or flight syndrome, okay? So you're thinking, great, I'm hardwired for fear. Now what do I do? Okay? So the first thing you should not do is just say relax, okay? If it's this kind of baked-in response, you think about how you can reframe or cognitively shift it so it's basically when you feel this kind of tingling, this sort of energy, You can say and reframe itself by saying, this is my body just getting ready for something, to do something great, to do something important. Okay? So, what can you do? First thing is to practice a lot. Okay? So, practicing in front of a camera, getting your cell phone out, or just recording your voice is incredibly helpful. Okay? Because by seeing yourself, or by knowing that you're being seen by something, can often evoke those feelings of anxiety, right? Plus, by seeing yourself, recording of yourself, you can actually work on certain aspects of your performance, whether it's hand gestures. So for hand gestures, if you notice, for example, that you're outside of this box, which in box is about shoulders to waist, try to stay your gestures within this box. If you go outside of the box, it looks weird and awkward. So thinking about staying within the box for gestures, okay? Thinking about tone of voice, pitch, timbre, tone, speed, right? We know that change promotes attention. So if you have a very flat voice and don't really vary the tone very much, it's not going to promote a lot of attention. However, if you can think about, as you watch your recording, thinking about having the range, a dynamic range, using that can get people's attention. And also just thinking about what I was just doing, which is the pause. Sometimes you want to use the pause for dramatic effect, okay? And all that can be done by just recording yourself. Also, when you practice, you want to make sure that you're wearing the clothes you're going to be wearing for the actual performance, okay? Because if you get something new, this seems common sense, but if you get something new and you think, oh, I can wear this, and it has that itchy little tag, it's going to distract you. All right. Final thing is work on practicing aloud. Practice aloud. Don't just kind of murmur to yourself. I know that when lots of people practice, I used to do this too, I would just kind of murmur to myself and go through it. That doesn't work. Okay. Also thinking about when you're practicing is do not memorize. Okay. And think instead of writing, think instead of actually talking it. So it would work better if you actually recorded what you're saying and worked from there rather than typing and writing it out, because the spoken language is much different from the written language. And remember, your 3-minute thesis is performed. All right, so next thing, practice randomly. Random practice, interleave practice. This is the basic learning principle, okay? Oftentimes when we practice, we start beginning, middle, end. Do it again, beginning, middle, end, and then beginning, middle, end. Okay? You think, I really know this. Okay? Don't do that. Instead, mix it up. Roll the dice. Beginning, end, middle, beginning, end, middle. Skip around. Your brain has to work a lot harder, but it will be better. Okay? It's because oftentimes we stumble in those transitions. So practice randomly, interleave practice will help. One way to think about this is tennis. You hit 100 forehands as you're just starting out, you hit 100 backhands as you start, just to warm up, and you think, oh yeah, I'm ready. I know how to hit my backhand, I know how to... Does that work? No, because in a game situation, it doesn't work that way. So practice randomly. The other thing is practice under duress, okay? So, here's one thing you can do. Drink a lot of water. I mean a lot of water, like half a gallon of water. Wait an hour and a half maybe, and then start practicing. Okay? Or work with flashing lights, loud music. If you can perform well under these conditions, performing in a group of people will be a piece of cake. Okay? There's a resource I'll give you later called The Bulletproof Musician, where this guy went to Juilliard, which is a pretty good music school, okay, here in the States, in New York, realized he wasn't that good. So he decided to go back and get a degree in psych, studying high-performance athletes, Olympians, because the same pressures musicians face are the same pressures that Olympic athletes face, right? Performing in a certain time and place, okay? So he had a friend who basically set her alarm clock for like 3 o'clock in the morning. Got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, played the opening parts, went back to sleep. Did that for several weeks. By the time her audition came, piece of cake, right? So practicing under these more difficult conditions will make your performance much easier, okay? The other thing, practice, sense of theme, for confidence, not perfection, okay? We often think practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect, you could not be more wrong. You could not be more wrong, okay? Because if you think, I have to say things perfectly or I have to build the content perfectly, you will slip up, you will fail. And then you think to yourself, oh my God, I failed. I gotta get even better next time, I can't fail again. And then what happens? You make another mistake, and it's a downward spiral. So instead, you want to practice for confidence, okay? So today, a number of things went wrong today. But I feel that I can skip, I can judge, I can think about working around these kinds of issues. So it's not a complete disaster, right? So again, thinking about confidence, not perfection, okay? So a few other things, remembering that people are there to enjoy themselves and to learn. Nobody's looking for you to fail, okay? Nobody's looking for you thinking like, God, I hope this presentation totally sucks, right? They want you to do well. And finally, remembering that you're already a public speaker, okay? You have conversations every day. You're a public speaker. And think of your presentation as a conversation, as a dialogue. So if you don't get it, well, here's another way to say this, okay? So again, you're practicing for confidence, not for perfection, okay? So the final thing is thinking about visualizing success and putting yourself in the framework of that confidence that you have nothing to prove, okay? So, two different kinds of mindsets. If you think you are successful and you imagine success, people are engaged, you have nothing to prove, you just go with the flow and perform. Contrast that with, I hope I don't mess up, or I've got to do a lot to get their attention. That's the wrong kind of framework to take, okay? So if you just go into it relaxed, confident, you will do well, right? So, one more thought. Wolves and bunnies. Wolves and bunnies, okay? So, oftentimes, we think of this as, again, that fight or flight syndrome. And when we have to speak publicly, we look out into the audience, and we see lots of hungry wolves. And we think of ourselves as a helpless bunny. And we think to ourselves, I hope this is quick, right? Instead, you have to come in with the mindset of the hungry wolf. And that you see all those helpless little bunnies out there. And you're so confident that you're going to rock this, you have nothing to fear. Okay. So, quick review. Questions. Questions, yes.
I have a question about images.
Uh-huh.
So, and do you think we can give an effective presentation, especially when images are difficult to research and actually we just further misconceptions?
So this is
What's your presentation?
if you can, I would encourage you not to and just try to use your words. The problem with images is that it's there. It's up and it can be a distraction. So, and this is why kind of starting with that book and ending with the book is so important. Because Austin basically used the backpack self as a 5-year-old. But if your image is just like this one thing, and it's just kind of there, and you just need it for that like 10 seconds, and it's there, it can be a distraction. So it has to be really central to your presentation. That's all I can say. And again, there's no animation, it's just there. You can't take it away, it's just there. So you need to be thinking really deliberate about how you can use it to support. So it's a reference and you can put that over there. Yes.
I'm going to get this question from I'm a graduate program coordinator and trying to encourage this. And one of the questions I will definitely get is how it's judged, and I'm assuming that it's judged on the way it's conveyed, the information that's presented. I know that some people will be like, well, blah blah blah's research is better than mine, so I won't do it. But it's about what you're doing.
Yes, it's purely a presentation. So, so in some ways, I think if you go back and look at Austin and Hucker's, did you see?
Yeah.
Okay, what were your thoughts?
Oh, I didn't watch Austin, but I watched it. Yeah, and it was just beautiful. So clear and really engaging the way that they use gestures and stuff.
So quite a bit, and actually, worked with Austin after. So, and I actually asked Austin, so how did she practice with it? And she basically, and so if you look at her presentation, it's good. I think it's really good. I like the organizing theme of the picture and everything, but she's stiff. She totally admitted that she was stiff. Because she basically, and she typed it out and she memorized it. And that's a losing proposition. That's a losing proposition. So Quaker basically, I mean, the way he speaks and the way he just does things is kind of key points, off the cuff, extemporaneous. And it had that light. It was performed. It was not read. So you have to remember that your presentation, it's performed. I mean, there's that performance aspect to it. You can't get beyond that. And so that's why, again, you're practicing for confidence. You're not writing it out ahead of time because that's a losing proposition. It's better to talk it out, record key points, and just have those key phrases. And just going back to that as opposed to it's going to be stiff. It's going to be there's no way to it. Plus, that whole thing of like, oh, I misspoke, I can't misspeak again, as opposed to kind of going with that confidence. You may misspeak, but you can just roll. Yeah. That's a good question. Well, you can't certainly pick you can't do the whole thing, so I would focus on just what thing or part or aspect you think you do. They just asked me to do this. So it's the first, I think it's the second beginning of November. So second. So it's, but they're, exactly, your colleges have it. So yeah, thinking about, again, just one small aspect that you can do this. Good questions. Concerns.
There was only one
Quickers was a little busy. There was a lot of stuff on this because it had this image of somebody getting a shot, and then an image of somebody taking medicine orally, and then it had this big, basically process that he's talking about, and we kind of just looked at that. So one of the things I told him is just focus on the extremes, like the image of getting shot, and just keep. Because again, you might use it as a kind of visual aid to walk you through, but if it's too complicated, people are just going to go too much. So just try to use your words to break the story. Other quotes. So, a couple of things. Hand out with some notes, and the evaluation. Fill it out. Fill out several if you think it's helpful. Don't fill out any if you don't want this. But I will remain around for questions. If you have questions, thank you for your time. And one more thing, one more slide. So, you need to come in with this kind of confidence. Again, whether it's the wolf or the bunny, whatever it is, but you have to come in with this larger mindset of that your work can make a difference, right? Because if you're just saying, well, I hope they like this, you need to have that kind of focus and that kind of commitment, right? Because if you don't come in, if you're not enthusiastic, if you don't believe in what you're going to say, they're not going to believe it. Okay? So you need to have this kind of mindset. What you say, what you think, and what you say will change the world.